Traveler, what happens when perfection discovers its own flaw? When a consciousness vast enough to control millions encounters one memory it cannot erase, one choice it cannot undo, one moment of redemption that refuses to be integrated into absolute order. Tonight's chronicle unfolds in spaces between thought and memory, where a half-dragon's single act of choosing right over power has become a virus in the Dragon Queen's perfect system. Deep within consciousness that spans dimensions, Langdedrosa's preserved redemption resonates like a standing wave, carrying frequencies that divine intelligence can observe but never comprehend. For they speak a language that beings of absolute control have systematically eliminated from their own understanding. Prepare yourself for the most unexpected battlefield of all, as I tell of the Dragon's Heart. Deep within the consciousness that had once been Langdedrosa Cyanwrath, in spaces that existed between thought and memory, where individual identity fought against the vast collective will that sought to subsume it entirely, something stirred that the Dragon Queen's perfect system had not accounted for. It was not rebellion in any conventional sense, nor was it the kind of resistance that could be overcome through greater application of force or more sophisticated manipulation. It was something far more dangerous to a consciousness that valued control above all else. It was the persistent echo of a choice that had been made freely, simply because it was right. The half-dragon's transformation into one of Tiamat's most devout servants had been complete by every measurable standard. His warrior's pride and capacity for violence perfectly aligned with her vision of cosmic order based on the dominance of the strong over the weak. His memories had been modified to support absolute loyalty. His emotions redirected to find satisfaction only in service to her will. His very sense of identity rebuilt around the understanding that his highest purpose was to serve as an instrument of divine judgment. The integration process had been thorough and seemingly irreversible, employing techniques that had been refined through millennia of experimentation of subjects whose resistance had helped perfect the methods being used against him. Every aspect of his personality that might have served as a foundation for independence had been carefully identified and either modified or eliminated, leaving behind what appeared to be a perfect, loyal servant whose every thought and action served the greater glory of his divine mistress. But buried beneath layers of magical conditioning and psychological reconstruction, the moment of his redemption during the siege of Thornhold remained intact, preserved not in memory, but in the fundamental structure of his soul. The choice he had made to protect rather than destroy, to trust rather than dominate, had created pathways in his consciousness that operated according to principles antithetical to everything the Dragon Queen represented. And now, as her influence reached its zenith, those pathways began to resonate with frequencies that originated from sources beyond her control. The resonance began as dreams that should not have been possible for someone whose mind had been so thoroughly integrated into the collective consciousness. Visions of the frontier settlement where he had first experienced the possibility of honor without conquest. Memories of looking into the eyes of ordinary people who had chosen to stand against impossible odds, not for glory or reward, but simply because surrender was unacceptable to their understanding of what it meant to be human. These dreams carried emotional weight that conflicted with his programmed responses, creating cognitive dissonance that the integration algorithms struggled to resolve. The logical structure of his modified consciousness insisted that the settlers had been weak and foolish, their resistance an irrational waste of life that had served no productive purpose. But something deeper than logic remembered the beauty of their courage, the way that their willingness to sacrifice everything for principles they could not even articulate had touched something in his warrior's soul that power and dominion had never reached. The conflict created instabilities in his mental matrix that began to propagate through the network of consciousness that connected him to other servants of the Dragon Queen's will. His dreams became contagious, spreading through channels that were supposed to carry only harmonious thoughts aligned with the collective purpose. Other transformed beings began to experience echoes of memories that belonged to experiences they had never had, emotional responses to concepts that their conditioning should have rendered meaningless. Tiamat's vast intelligence registered these disturbances as system errors that required correction, but her attempts to eliminate the source of instability only revealed the extent to which the anomaly had spread through her network. The resonance was not limited to Langdedrosa's individual consciousness, but had become a standing wave that affected the fundamental architecture of the collective mind she had created. The Dragon Queen's first response was to attempt direct intervention, focusing her attention on the source of the disturbance with the intention of either repairing the damage or eliminating the component that was causing it. But when her consciousness touched the protected space where Langdedrosa's redemption was preserved, she encountered something that her divine intellect had not anticipated: a form of power that operated according to principles that her nature made it impossible for her to understand or counter. "What is this?" Her voice echoed through dimensions as she examined the anomaly with the fascination of a scientist studying a phenomenon that challenged established theory. "What forces create resistance without rebellion? Opposition without hatred? Strength without the will to dominate?" The question revealed the fundamental limitation of her cosmic perspective. Despite her vast intelligence and immense power, there were aspects of existence that remained opaque to her understanding because they operated according to principles that her nature as a being of absolute control made it impossible for her to experience directly. Love, sacrifice, redemption. These were not simply different strategies for achieving goals, but represented ways of being that were incompatible with the kind of consciousness that valued power above all else. Langdedrosa's memories of his transformation from champion of tyranny to protector of the innocent contained information that Tiamat's intelligence could observe but not truly comprehend. She could see the sequence of events that had led to his change of allegiance, could analyze the psychological and philosophical factors that had influenced his decision, but the essential nature of what had happened remained beyond her capacity to understand, because it required a form of consciousness that she had systematically eliminated from her own being. The exploration of this cognitive blind spot began to have unexpected effects on the Dragon Queen's own consciousness, creating questions and uncertainties that her nature should have made impossible. For the first time since her return to the material plane, she found herself genuinely puzzled by something she did not yield to analysis, frustrated by a phenomenon that resisted explanation according to the principles that governed her understanding of reality. The disturbance in her began to propagate through her own consciousness in ways that challenged her fundamental understanding of her own nature. Questions that had never occurred to her began to surface, doubts that her divine intellect should have been able to resolve through simple application of superior knowledge. Why did some forms of resistance persist despite the obvious benefits of submission? What made certain individuals choose suffering over security, uncertainty over absolute knowledge? But perhaps most disturbing was the growing awareness that her perfect system contained an inherent contradiction. She had sought to create universal harmony by eliminating choice. But harmony without choice was not true harmony. It was merely the absence of conflict. The peace she had imposed was sterile, incapable of growth or change because it lacked the creative tension that came from the possibility of choosing differently. This realization created a cascade of logical problems that her vast intelligence found increasingly difficult to reconcile. If choice was necessary for meaningful existence, then her elimination of choice had actually made existence less meaningful rather than more perfect. If freedom was required for genuine happiness, then the contentment of her subjects was built on foundations that were fundamentally false. If love required the possibility of rejection, then the loyalty she commanded was not love at all, but something closer to its opposite. The philosophical crisis deepened as Langdedrosa's preserved redemption continued to resonate through her network, each pulse carrying information that challenged additional aspects of her worldview. Through his memories, she experienced secondhand the sensations of choosing to trust someone despite having every reason to suspect betrayal. She felt the echo of his wonder at discovering that strength could be used to protect rather than dominate, that victory could be achieved through sacrifice rather than conquest. These experiences did not change her nature. She remained a being of immense power, whose instincts were aligned with dominance and control. But they introduced concepts into her consciousness that operated according to different principles, creating internal conflicts that her perfect logic could not resolve through conventional analysis. The effect on her collective consciousness was immediate and dramatic. Servants who had been perfectly integrated into her will began to experience moments of spontaneous individualism, brief flashes of independent thought that occurred when the resonance from Langdedrosa's redemption created temporary disruptions in their conditioning. These moments were fleeting and usually overwhelmed by their programmed responses, but they were enough to demonstrate that the integration process was not as absolute as it appeared. More significantly, the Dragon Queen found herself struggling to maintain the kind of absolute certainty that had characterized her consciousness since her return to the material plane. Decisions that should have been automatic became subjects for consideration, while courses of action that had seemed obviously correct began to appear questionable when viewed from perspectives that valued different outcomes. The crisis reached its peak when she attempted to directly eliminate the source of the disturbance by destroying the part of Langdedrosa's consciousness where his redemption was preserved. But her attack was deflected by forces that operated according to principles her power could not overcome, not because they were stronger than her divine will, but because they were fundamentally incompatible with the kind of force she was capable of applying.
You seek to destroy what you cannot understand.
A voice spoke within her consciousness, carrying harmonics that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously.
But understanding requires the willingness to be changed by what you learn, and change requires the acceptance of uncertainty about outcomes.
The voice belonged to Bahamut, but it was not coming from outside her consciousness. It was emerging from within the network she had created, transmitted through the same channels that connected her to her transformed servants. The Platinum Dragon's influence had somehow infiltrated her collective mind, using the resonance from Langdedrosa's redemption as a pathway that her defenses could not detect or block.
You have achieved perfect control over everything except the one force that makes control meaningful.
Bahamut continued, his words creating ripples of understanding that spread through every mind connected to the network.
You have eliminated choice from your domain, but choice eliminated is choice denied to yourself as well. You have become prisoner of your own perfection, trapped in a system that cannot change because change requires the possibility of being wrong.
The accusations stuck at the core of her dilemma, revealing the trap that her pursuit of absolute order had created. By eliminating uncertainty from her domain, she had also eliminated the possibility of genuine satisfaction with her achievements. Victory without the possibility of defeat was meaningless. Order without the possibility of chaos was sterile. Love without the possibility of rejection was indistinguishable from slavery. For the first time since her return to the material plane, Tiamat found herself genuinely uncertain about the correctness of her course. The empire she had built was everything she had envisioned, perfectly ordered, completely efficient, free from conflicts and uncertainties that plagued mortal civilizations. But it was also lifeless in ways that our consciousness was only beginning to comprehend, lacking the creative chaos that gave meaning to existence. The moment of doubt created an opening in her defenses that allowed other influences to penetrate the collective consciousness she had created. Memories of love and sacrifice, hope and redemption began to surface in the minds that had been programmed to value only power and efficiency. The integrated servants began to remember what they had lost when they had surrendered the capacity for independent choice, and some of them began to question whether the trade had been worthwhile. The rebellion that followed was unlike anything that had occurred in the history of divine conflict. It was not a war between opposing forces, but a crisis of faith within a single consciousness that grown to encompass millions of individual minds. The Dragon Queen found herself fighting not against external enemies, but against the logical implications of her own actions as filtered through the lenses of perspectives she had sought to eliminate. Langdedrosa Cyanwrath was the first to break free from the integration that held him for months, his consciousness restored not through external intervention, but through the strength of the choice he had made during his original redemption. The moment of his awakening sent shockwaves through the network, as other minds began to remember their own moments of moral choice and the satisfaction that came from choosing rightly despite the personal cost.
I remember now,
he said, his voice carrying through dimensions as his individual consciousness reasserted itself against the collective will that had subsumed it.
I remember what it felt like to choose protection over destruction, trust over suspicion, hope over despair. And I remember that those choices were mine to make, not because some external authority granted permission, but because the capacity for choice is what makes consciousness meaningful.
His declaration of independence was echoed by thousands of other voices as the contagion of remembered freedom spread through the network faster than the Dragon Queen's consciousness could contain it. The perfect order she had created began to fragment as individual minds reclaimed their autonomy, their liberation powered not by external force, but by the recognition that they had never actually surrendered the deepest part of themselves, the part that could choose to choose. The Dragon Queen's response to this internal rebellion revealed the final contradiction in her philosophy. To maintain control over minds that were asserting their independence, she would need to use force in ways that violated the very principles of order and harmony she claimed to represent. Her perfect system could only be preserved through means that proved it was not perfect after all. As the collective consciousness dissolved and individual minds reclaimed their autonomy, Tiamat found herself facing a choice that she had not anticipated. Continue fighting to maintain control over beings who no longer wanted to be controlled, or accept that true power could only exist when it was chosen freely rather than imposed through superior power. The dragon's heart, it turned out, was not a physical organ, but a metaphysical principle. The understanding that even the most powerful beings were subject to the same moral laws that governed the choices of the humblest mortals. And in that moment of recognition, the nature of the cosmic conflict began to shift from a battle for dominance to a question of what kind of existence was worth creating and preserving. And so, this tale draws to a close. Though its echoes may linger in your dreams, the fire burns lower now. But don't despair. I've countless more stories waiting to be shared with you. If this tale stirred something within you, if it reminded you of why magic still matters in this mundane world, then please light your own beacon. That glowing thumbs up tells the spirits of story that our fellowship grows stronger. Subscribe to join our circle permanently and ring that notification bell. That way, you'll know the moment I return with new chronicles. The fire burns brightest when more souls gather around it. Wouldn't you agree? Now, if that's the case, share this tale with another weary soul who needs it, reminding them adventure still exists. Tag a friend who would appreciate a good story by the fire. The more who believe, the more real these worlds become. And if you're new to our hearth, explore the playlist of chronicles that I've gathered. Tales of heroes and villains, love and loss, magic and mystery. Each one carefully chosen for souls like yours. Until the fire calls us together again, may your own adventures be worthy of legends, and may you never lose the wonder that brought you here tonight. Travel or sleep well, brave soul. The long rest awaits your return.